morning everyone, and thanks so much. A lot of you have traveled a very long distance to be here, so I'm very, very grateful for that. It was under the aegis of ACGS that this study was really conducted by Nirupama and Bhupesh, Swati, the team that worked on this study. And Nirupama is a long-standing animal rights advocate, and she spent decades in the non-profit sector in behavioral sciences.
Yes. Yeah.
Should I have said decades?
Yes, a couple of decades or so is good.
Yes.
Not 5, not 10.
Not at all, no one would guess. So, and Bhupesh heads ASIUL, which is a market research agency, and he's the founder of that. And they have been part of the survey that is part of this study. And where is Swati? Yes, there. Yes, Swati is also part of the digital, the social media part of this study. So, and welcome everyone.
Hi everyone, and I'm Nirupama, and as Bharti said, I worked for many years in the non-profit world, and basically my training is in behavior change communication and advocacy and campaigning, and I moved from managing and implementing and designing campaigns nationally. I worked for more than 10 years on the HIV epidemic right from the start in India and in several other countries in Africa. And in more recent years, I've moved more to research, monitoring and evaluation, impact assessments, that kind of thing. And thank you very much for making the time to be here and the effort. Today, I'm going to share the findings of this study that I've been engaged with. And it's going to take about an hour. Yeah, I better confess up front. We're condensing about 250 pages of research with 3 discrete reports that constitute the study. So it will take some time. Bear with us. We will try and make it as painless as possible. So, some years ago I just started getting very disturbed with this question. And I asked myself, go to the first slide. Yeah, sorry. So I woke up one morning and asked myself, what's going on with this world? Is veganism failing in India? Why did I ask myself this question? Everywhere in the media, there was talk about how India is not a vegetarian country, it is a meat-eating country contrary to the popular myth, and less than a third of Indians are actually vegetarian. And those numbers are falling very rapidly. Between NFHS 4 and 5, we had 5 percentage point decline in the number of men who are vegetarian, which means that people are, especially men, are starting to embrace meat eating. We know, all of you are in the room, you know these facts, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but meat and dairy industries are booming, and there are many things in the last 20 years that have made eating meat cool. It's urbanization, globalization, it's the branded pocket-friendly KFCs and Domino's, and the loosening of social norms, yeah. And in recent years, unfortunately, the long-standing politicization of food, of meat, especially beef, has come to the fore again. There have been attacks on people who are suspected of eating meat, in possession of beef, transporting cattle for slaughter, and so more progressive segments of society, liberal progressive segments of society, have stood up and thrown beef parties. It's a right to food and all of that, and we'll see why that's happening. And it's an assertion of democratic rights. They are opposing what they call food fascism. Next. And meat is considered very polluting, right? On the other hand, dairy has always been considered very pure and sacred for a number of reasons. Hindu mythology, cute little the baby Krishna running around stealing butter. There's also been the white revolution of the 1970s, ushered in by Dr. Verghese Kurian and Amul, which lifted millions out of poverty, the dairy cooperative movement. And there's this endearing Amul girl who's a household name and popular mascot. And their marketing cloud, their advertising cloud is phenomenal and very well loved, by Indian citizens. Next. So much so, dairy is so precious that the slightest anti-dairy advocacy triggers this kind of backlash. So there was this ugly incident soon after Joaquin Phoenix's Oscar speech, where literally the Amul girl was smearing butter on his face. And then there's this instance, and I'm sure many of you know this, that some young activists who had posted about dairy were threatened with defamation cases by Amul, and they were forced to pull down their posts. So in this kind of volatile environment, people throwing beef parties, state diktats to enforce vegetarianism, and anti-dairy advocacy is met with this kind of backlash. How do we engage in vegan advocacy? What place does it have in this country? So that's how I embarked on this study, which it's a 3-year study, and about 15 people participated in it. Krishnanumi Hari, who couldn't make it unfortunately, he led on the literature review, and Neha Gupta also couldn't be present, led on the social media analysis, and Bhupesh fortunately is here, he led on the survey. And we've had contributions from various people, and you might know Kritika Srinivasan, who's written extensively about animal rights and studies, and Dr. Usha Raman of University of Hyderabad as advisors. And it was done under the aegis of All Creatures Great and Small. So I have just led you through the background of the study, and now I'm going to run you through the key questions, goals, methodology, scope and limitations, the findings, recommendations, and the challenges. So this cough is from eating too much cold stuff. It's not anything contagious. I thought I should quickly clarify. No need to mask up. So the key questions we had for the study. So this is my training. This is where I come from. What is the evidence that exists? What does the research evidence say about what works or doesn't work for vegan advocacy? And that's a reason I put an asterisk in place of the A. It stands for vegetarianism and vegan. And we were forced to do that because a lot of the literature veganism is a fairly recent movement, and there's less literature about veganism. But hopefully we can extrapolate from the findings for the vegetarian studies and use those for veganism as well. And who are the key actors, the key campaigns? What is the framing and positioning of veganism and of the campaigns, and do they align with the scientific evidence that is out there of what works and doesn't work? And then we used what is a very common framework to understand advocacy, campaigning, behavior change. It's knowledge, attitudes, and practices, because the belief is that you need to increase your awareness, you need to change attitudes, and then behaviors change, sort of in a linear kind of way. And also I just want to clarify, there's advocacy, campaigning, and behavior change are different things. For the purpose of this study, I'm just going to stick with advocacy. And the goals of the study were to fill the knowledge gap. We don't have any study of this kind in India. In our review, we found about 3 studies, all focused on vegetarianism, and all of them were survey studies. So one was by animal equality, the other by faunalytics, and that was done across the BRICS countries. and I think there's a Pew Center study, and I know more recently Veganori, I don't know how to pronounce that word quite well. So yeah, very recent, right, 23. So that's not part of the study, yeah. And so we wanted to identify, to take stock of the situation, identify challenges, recommendations, good practices for vegan advocacy, and finally, what we're trying to do here is to design an evidence-based, impactful vegan advocacy strategy for India. And I cannot reiterate the importance of that, to have a strategy that people participate in developing so that there's something in writing, who is doing what and how, and there's the evidence, and we can assess ourselves and see how far we've come in a few years. Yeah. So we started with a literature review. It's humongous, and of over 100 academic papers, peer-reviewed journals, and which cover sociocultural, cognitive, behavioral factors that influence dietary choices. This was the very first step, and that also informed the social media analysis of vegan advocacy in India, where we've developed 24 case studies from some 600 pieces of raw data. And that in turn informed the design of the survey, which was online because it was during COVID and the donor had asked us to stick to an online. And we did the survey in 5 cities, tier 1 cities, Bombay, Bangalore, Chennai, Delhi and Calcutta, with 1,000 population, English fluent. Some of those challenges, limitations of the study, I'm not going to be able to tell you that what is the impact of vegan advocacy in India at this point in time. Yeah, it's not an impact assessment, the methodology, all of that would be hugely different if we were to do that. And there are so many pieces of data and research evidence, and sometimes they are even contradictory. So you'll see that it all depends on the research size, the methodologies, the sample size, the respondent profile, and the methodologies. And we found that a lot of the behavioral science data is from the West, whereas in India the focus is sociological analyses of how religion and caste impact and region specificities impact dietary choices. And we had to focus only on social media because that was the most accessible. Clearly, logistically, it's impossible for us to go around collecting offline sort of, content, billboards, etc., and yeah, it was too difficult. And as I said, sample size for the survey was limited, 1,000, so it's hard to generalize to the entire population of India. But what it does do is provide some kind of framework and guideline for future surveys. And that was the most difficult, finding people to work on the study with us. So, from the literature review, what did we find? We've all been working on animal rights, so we are familiar with the term speciesism and carnism, but I really want us to spend 2 minutes here. And I've been part of this, blaming and being judgmental with people who do eat meat and who are not vegan. And I think it's really important that people are very much products of their circumstances and accident of birth. Many of us in the room in India and outside actually in India are vegetarian by birth. It's an accident of birth, nothing else. So we cannot get all virtuous about it, we don't eat meat. It's really a way how you are born, what caste, what religion. So we should stop being judgmental. Not just that, people are products of their social conditioning and their circumstances. And it's really useful to know that this has been studied intensively. What are the psychological processes that kick in when people need to engage in meat eating. Most of this is related to meat eating, I must clarify, not dairy. So the belief is that intrinsically and initially there is a cognitive dissonance about eating meat. And we're all familiar with those many videos of little children crying and protesting, I don't want to eat, I love this chicken, I don't want to eat her, blah, blah, blah. So there is that cognitive dissonance, but it reduces over time, thanks to habit, and a lot of other processes that kick in, moral disengagement, rationalizing, dementalizing animals, that they have no minds, and that perceived sentience. For example, you don't eat animals that are higher on the sentience level. You will not eat this chimp, but you will eat a fish which seems to have no mind, no personality, nothing, right? And then there is something that has been studied very extensively called the 4 Ns, which is meat is natural, normal, necessary, and nice. A group of scholars led by Piazza came up with this term, and the nice, it was initially the 3 Ns, the 4th N they got from Melanie Joy, the nice, the pleasure component, so you can unpack it, very well. And of course for everyone, religion and tradition is a huge role. In the case of gender, there is something called meat attachment, which has actually been studied, and there's a meat attachment questionnaire that's been administered. The higher the meat attachment, the lower the intention to adopt vegetarianism or veganism. And it's much higher among men, and perhaps that has to do with a construct of masculinity, power, authority, privilege, all of that. And women display more meat disgust and are early adopters for either meat reduction or abstinence. On the other hand, veganism, and this is the literature saying, and there have been meta-analyses of hundreds and hundreds of papers, say that health is the number one motivator for adopting veganism. The number one. Except the case of younger age groups and those who had already turned vegan. And it's especially important to the older age group, 40 to 60. But the perception of health as an appeal, there's the disease alleviation component. Yes, I will quit meat for, to reduce my cholesterol, diabetes, etc., etc. But there's also this other side, when for nutrition and fitness, I need to have a balanced diet. I need to have protein, B12, vitamin D. I need to eat meat. So this is how complex the human mind is. You can hold two seemingly contradictory ideas in your head and function that way. And it's important for us to recognize that. The environment followed as a second motivator, and it's also important. Health is an egotistic motivator, self-centric, and it stands to reason that would score, top of the list. An environment, altruistic motivator, for the larger good, some sense of social responsibility, I want to reduce my carbon footprint, etc. But the barriers for using the environment argument as an appeal is that there's first of all very low awareness, of the link between animal agriculture and environmental sustainability and climate change. And there's a complexity of that linkage. It's hard to simplify the very complex technical information, though there have been 1 or 2 memes that all of us can recall which work. There's also perceived remoteness. It's going to happen 100 years later. It's not going to affect me, And what do I do as an individual? The sense of being powerless in terms of mitigating climate change. And they also studied that out of all the climate mitigation options presented, people were willing to walk to work, fly less, do all of those things, but reducing or cutting out meat from their diet, they felt most powerless around that. Okay, this is based in the West, these studies. So sense of self-efficacy to engage in that reduction or abstinence was very low. In terms of animal rights, which is the third motivator, and again I repeat, this doesn't mean that animal rights and welfare is not important. It works for those who are in the younger age group and for a certain subset in the general population that's already sort of inclined to turn vegan. So compassion and ethics, are huge drivers. But the barriers are the 4 N's, and then lack of knowledge on how to follow a vegan diet. It's too difficult, can't cut it out. And there is also something that has been studied which is very real, vegan stigma. Certainly in the West, and certainly in certain communities here in India as well. And we will share some findings from our survey which corroborates that. Yeah, I don't want to be vegan because people will make fun of me or stand out like a freak. And there's also studies that say that the very presence of a vegetarian in the West or a vegan at the dining table is enough to cause discomfort and defensiveness. Some of the socio-cultural factors which are specific to India, we know it's mostly by birth, and this notion of purity and pollution. And there are studies that say that. For example, the Phonalytics study, which was conducted in BRICS countries, showed that India had the highest level of anti-animal responses when it came to farmed animals. So, of course, abstinence from meat is valued in Hindu majoritarian culture, but there's wiggle room. We don't cook meat in the house, but we'll go and eat at KFC. Oh, I don't eat eggs, but I'm happy to eat that cake with eggs. And so in India you'll find that chicken, mutton, and so-called vegetarian eggs, which are unfertilized and which are products of the ghastly factory farming system, they are consumed copiously. And in India, of course, women eat less, or more women abstain from meat, reduce meat. And that's because of larger socio-cultural disparities. Let's not assume with some intrinsic compassion, but it could be the inequity, gender relations inequity. Men are afforded the privilege of eating meat, women are not. And there are also socio-cultural and familial norms that restrict women from consuming meat. Also, in India, unlike the West, India is a collectivist culture, not individualistic. So there is what is called front stage and backstage behaviors. Oh, I'm sattvic, I'm good, I'm pure by day, and by night I'm stuffing my face at KFC. But that's hidden. Next.
Sorry, backstage refers to hidden.
Yeah. Like in a theatre room, right? Front stage, backstage. Some of the key strategies revealed by the literature review, which have been used, is the animal rights, where you're anthropomorphizing, drawing strong parallels between human beings and animals in terms of their capacity for intelligence, for love, for bonding, to feel pain. And what the literature says is animal intelligence, appearance, that is cute animals, and the capacity for bonding in this order are the most powerful, when you anthropomorphize. So intelligence, appearance, and then capacity for bonding and suffering. Next, you highlight the cognitive dissonance. Remember I told you about how meat eaters do feel a certain sense of cognitive dissonance which they quickly dissolve by rationalizing, etc., etc. But here you highlight the cognitive dissonance. You are a good human being, you're gentle, you're kind, but you are eating meat, which is the result of you're eating animals which come from a horrific circle of violence. There's moral shock, which many of us have used, but there's a lot of caution around using moral shock as a strategy for a number of reasons. There's so much violence in the media anyway these days, and people get desensitized. And then also when you see horrific, footage from some factory farm somewhere, then you're blaming them, shifting the accountability. You're not holding yourself. They are going wrong. What can I do? And what's worked is that if you are using moral shock, then you have welfare petitions. I'm not so sure that in India we've seen much of this, at least in our study, that activists are holding certain companies accountable and having people sign welfare petitions for them to improve their standards and then signing their dietary pledges to go vegan or vegetarian. I haven't come across that very much, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. Yeah. Some other very important strategies other than the animal rights strategies that are aimed directly at certain audiences. We need to create a supportive ecosystem for vegan adoption overall, which would include all of these appeals: health, environment, animal rights, taste also, which has been studied less incidentally in our literature. And then social modeling, using celebrities and public figures to talk about veganism, promote it. And there are studies that say that in the West, for example, Alicia Silverstone and Ellen DeGeneres going vegan was something that really helped shift veganism from a fringe political movement in the West, to something that became more mainstream, and mainstream consumptive lifestyle of healthism, and a depoliticized one. So you have to weigh the pros and cons when you engage in social modeling. Do you want to maintain it as a political movement, or do you want to soften it, sanitize it, and talk about health and mainstream it that way? There are also the importance of on-ground networks and the weekly or monthly potlucks, vegan potlucks, and recruiting more members, outreach, persuading people to try vegan food, and that helps a lot in maintaining vegan practice and also counters stigma and gives vegans a sense of community. And critical to deconstruct veganism into something simple, doable, low cost, do-it-yourself mode. Vegan challenges have been hugely successful globally and in India. And strengthening the supply, marketing, branding, and what is called choice architecture and nudges, which is basically at the point of purchase, you arrange things in your merchandise in such a manner that the vegan choice is the default choice. You're not eliminating non-vegan food, but you're making the vegan choice more accessible. And ethical consumerism is a nascent movement globally and in India. We need to be working with integrate veganism and plant-based product within this larger umbrella, and talk about and educate consumers, because really people are not aware. In fact, one study, sorry to say, Shankar, 75% of people in India didn't recognize the green and brown logos of FSSAI. 75%, which is alarming. And there's also about labeling and certification in India especially. These are considered very suspect, nobody knows the processes, they're not transparent. How much credibility do you assign it? These are all things that we need to look into. So that's the literature review and the evidence. Yeah. You want to breathe a bit? I'm going to drop my lozenges. I didn't want to say we will be sharing the PowerPoint with you all, so summaries, yeah, sure.
So Nirupama, the 75-25 corresponds well with our Indian vegetarian, non-vegetarian population. The non-vegetarians are not bothered about vegetarian, non-vegetarian.
True.
So that,
Yes, you're right. Yes, that's a good connect. Yeah. Okay, next. So our social media analysis, we basically looked at some of the key players for veganism in India, and we have a total of 24 case studies based out of the 600 raw data entries that we had, and Swati Poddar was instrumental in getting us this data. And we've divided them up into these categories, which are the frames for the analysis. These are the core appeals: animal rights, environment, climate change, religion, spirituality. I must caution you that it is a biased sample. We are familiar with mostly animal rights stakeholders, and we did try to look at groups like, what's Sunitha Narayan's group? CSE, yeah, CSE, CEE, ESG, all these environmental groups. But we know for a fact that they are not remotely promoting veganism by any say. In fact, they're probably anti-vegan. So we did try. It's kind of broadly reflective of the situation. I also want to say when these case studies, they have one primary frame, but it's not like they are working in silos. They also have supplementary frames. So an animal rights frame can have a vegan adoption frame. An environment frame can have also a religious spirituality frame, supplementary. And what do we mean by vegan adoption? Any content that's helping the audience, the viewers, transition to veganism. How to, recipes, webinars, challenges, yeah? Next. So, in behavior change, there is this framework. I mean, there is evidence that behavior change does not happen like a magic bullet. Somebody gets exposed to a message and they're vegan overnight. No. It happens in incremental phases, and it starts with what is called pre-contemplation and contemplation, which is basically providing new information or accessing new information and starting to consider it. And then the preparation, action, and along the way there can be relapses, yeah? People may go from stage 1 to, they may not get to stage 3. So we found that most of the campaigns were focused on pre-contemplation, contemplation. They stopped there. And to me, intrinsically, that sounds counterproductive, because 2024, and there are lots of plant-based products in the market. There's a lot of knowledge out there on how to make things yourself. So perhaps we should be focusing more on the prep, action, maintenance stages. Yeah? Okay. Next. Unfortunately, here's some bad news. 70% of the campaigns had low and very low reach. And the reasons for that are many. Could be many. Maybe we focus too much on just content creation and not content dissemination. Maybe we don't know how to do that. There's a lot of digital marketing techniques. People have good intentions, they produce content, they put it out, but they don't engage in the follow-up necessary to take it forward. Only 2%. So you have the criteria. Anything between 500 to 3,000 views is considered low or very low, depending which end of the spectrum. And from 30,000 to a million plus is high, very high. And we had only 2%. I mean, it's really low figures. And that's something to take note. Yeah, the other reason is that I think most of this messaging is coming from animal rights groups. And if your initial subscriber base, if you are an organization and you have a low subscriber base because you haven't really invested in your social media work, your campaigns are also going to have very low reach. So building your subscriber base is very crucial. We found the content used all of these appeals, which is good. And there is also a very notable, valuable, good practice, which is to Indianize the content and to write on existing cultural symbols and leveraging them. So for example, the long-standing Save the Girl Child campaign, national campaign, which ran for some... Sorry?
Save the boy child.
That's right. So Save the Girl Child was the long-standing campaign by the government of India and many NGOs. And Peter has inverted and subverted that to say Save the Boy Child, which will, and they were billboards, yeah? Which here it's a poster, but it's a billboard campaign initially. It might have had other elements to it. But this certainly piques curiosity, and to my mind, we don't know, we haven't done an impact assessment, but sounds like a good one. Vegan India movement wrote on the idea of Satyagraha, and I think that campaign was around Independence Day, if I'm right. Yeah? Or
No, October.
October 2nd. Okay, sorry. Independence Day, I know. Abhay, you had something. Dairy se bhi azadi. Yeah, good luck. I know your campaigns. So, yeah. And we found, unfortunately, that most campaigns were blind to religion and caste. And we really need to take note of this. Blind is not necessarily good. Yeah, we need to know where people are coming from. They are products of their circumstances and conditioning. And there was one notable effort, may not have had much reach, but it was a good effort where people from a minority community talked about certain practices, and it's great that minority voices are talking about it. Rather than majoritarian voices going and condemning the practices of certain religions, it's good that the people from that religion, representing that religion, take the lead on that. It also breaks stereotypes about people being a certain way. It makes it more secular, more inclusive. And again, Vegan India, they linked animal rights to a wider social justice movement, and I think that's really the way to go, in a very fundamental way. That needs to be the basis for our work going forward. And whether it's India or globally, vegan advocacy has a young face. And maybe we want to think about expanding that, yeah, for certain reasons in India. So, it's great that the bulk of the campaigns were focused on dairy in India because it is so all-pervasive, so omniscient, omnipotent. So the campaigns, many groups have run, PETA, FIAPO, who else? Sorry? Okay, but they're not part of our work. But many groups were running anti-dairy campaigns, which is great, commendable. And there is something called the grand narrative, yeah, which is historically long-standing, historically constructed stories and belief systems about things. So strong that an alternative reality is rendered impossible. So dairy is benign, dairy is good, the cow is happy, she's a nurturing mother, she gives you her milk voluntarily, or it's sacrilege to refuse it, so on and so forth. Yeah? But very few of these dairy campaigns talk about health perceptions around dairy, which is something that we need to consider. And health strategies, as I said earlier, there's a holistic body-mind approach and diabetes reversal, etc., and supporting vegan adoption through, especially a group like Sharon, for example. You'll see a lot of that. And during COVID, PETA rented 1 million eyeballs, I think, with their full page ads, which was great in my view as an animal rights activist. I say this, but there have also been, I think, $1 Million Vegan also, yeah, did this kind of work, but it's something for us to reflect on and actually assess before and get some empirical evidence around it, because the general public, I don't know whether they believe this, that COVID has come from wet markets, and whether they're debating it or the jury's still out. There's a bit of a question mark. There's a risk that we might be seen as lacking credibility and being sensationalist. Yeah, we don't know till we actually assess it. Next. Some of the environmental strategies, again, body, mind, holistic, minimalistic living, and climate healers, compassion tours, and drawing from religions, not just Hinduism, but also having some interfaith consultations. And of course, FIAPO's music videos for, what's that? Give the Planet a Break. Yeah, that campaign. And minimizing suffering footprint, that is Robin Singh's People Farm. Yeah. So here we're coming to that angle about creating a positive ecosystem for vegan adoption. So everybody is using celebrities and public figures. And great, Malika Sherawat, sexy, high visibility, recall. But there are people like Swara Bhaskar and Richa Chadha who are also endorsing veganism, and they have a lot of credibility because they are gravitas, because they are associated with wider social justice issues, and so that's something to consider. And they've written about the issue as well. And there are some question marks around Virat Kohli being used as a vegan icon, because he's vegetarian, not vegan, and maybe one needs to be really careful because that again undermines credibility. And then, Maneka Gandhi, he is a public figure, has been one of our most long-standing voices for animal rights. And very importantly, and I think Shankar, you are also in line with that, shifting our focus away from this commercialized, consumptive attitude towards veganism, eat vegan this, vegan that, blah, 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 this obsession really, to shifting the focus to a minimalistic, sustainable, low carbon footprint lifestyle, which I think is really important, because otherwise people see veganism as a very Western, upmarket, elitist lifestyle. Yeah. Next. And we've got case studies on this in each of the reports. Robin Singh uses a style that is amazingly engaging, a storytelling style. Yeah, 10-minute videos. He links the demand for milk with the cow on the street, with garbage, with this, all of that. And then he adopts a middle of the road approach, and people may have different opinions about that. He talks about being veganish, not vegan, and reducing the suffering footprint, and I think he calls it clean milk. So, and Arvind Karnan, he's fantastic. For those of you who haven't seen him take down Jaggi Vasudev, blow by blow by blow, I mean, you have to, my heart swells with pride, when I watch that, because he leverages logic so well, and he clearly knows what he's talking about. And when Jaggi Vasudev gives one of his random evasive answers and then chuckles, cackles after that, he says that's a straw man's argument. Yeah, so he comes across like a very credible activist who has done his homework, who knows how people are using rhetoric to deceive and fool you. And he really tears into shreds. Health and disease alleviation, of course, Nandita Shah does a lot of work around that, but Sharon doesn't have such a huge following. It's a certain USP, niche audience, people engage with it, and she's a huge star offline. Everybody I'm running into has gone through a diabetes reversal program and all of that and switched to veganism for health reasons. And I think a lot of credit would go to her and people like her. And Darshana's morning walks. Yeah. So
Morning walk talk.
Walk talk. Okay. So Darshana's videos, this is offline, but you also uploaded it, and that's how we were able to access it. And she makes use of cognitive dissonance as a strategy to get people to come to terms with their contradictions. And most vegan brands, and here I'll clarify, commercial vegan brands like SoFit will not talk about the ethical angle at all. Theirs is about health and fitness, and I can understand that for pragmatic reasons. But it's nice that other groups like Good Milk or One Good or Nourish You and Veggie Champ as well, they have muted references to animal rights and welfare. So here they are, some examples. Next. And of course we all are familiar with this, that there are religious and spiritual leaders who have always valorized vegetarianism in India. and most of them seem to promote what one can see as an upper caste sensibility. People who are vegetarian, who are endorsing vegetarianism and promoting it. And but the rest of India doesn't live that way, and that's why it's important to know that we are only a minority. People who are upper caste by birth and practice vegetarianism is really a minority. And rest of India thinks and eats differently. And we did find some notable examples of some Jain monks and nuns who were promoting veganism. I think that's really outstanding. And of course you have people like Acharya Prashant. I must give credit, B.K. Shivani also has a video with Suresh Oberoi. It's quite old. But she makes the link between animal agriculture and climate change and environmental sustainability. So it's good to see that. Okay, there. Another breather. So now we will move on to the CAP survey, which Bhupesh will present.
Morning everyone. Thank you Nirupma for putting all the complexities of the study together and for the presentation. Yeah, fine. So I think I'll take around 10 minutes, so just to give you an idea of how long are we into this session, and then I think 5-7 minutes Nirupma will go into recommendation and the key takeaways of all the three elements together: the literature review, the social media analysis, and the CAP study. So broadly, I mean, on the primary market research part, there are three elements that come to my mind, as in what we did and why we did it, and then maybe how we take the findings of the study and how do we assess and process it. So like Nirupma has already mentioned, and we've already discussed some parts of the study, as in what we did. So we did this study, I just repeat again, we did the study in 5 cities, the 5 bigger metros, Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai and Bangalore. And the sample size in market research terms was not very big, but then it gives a directional level of findings. And in the sampling, we were taking care of the other distributions of population that are there in government sources of data and others. So those things we've taken care of, and we can take these findings to give basically to go 1 step, 2 steps deeper into our exploration of the subject of veganism and its advocacy, and what do people think about it and what can they do. So just enter.
Bhupesh, what was the sample size?
1,000.
In each city or collectively?
No, collectively. So it's sort of a dipstick. Basically, it gives a feeler of what's the awareness level, what do people think, and so on. Yeah, so while we were discussing some of the aspects, so one thing came to my mind, and I'm not the expert, but the term itself, vegan. So do we have alternative terms for this in other languages and all? So we asked this as it is, and while we asked people on their basic understanding of the term vegan, so many people claim that yeah, we know what it means, but then when we asked them to detail it and explain it, so that number came down. So only around 2 in 5 they actually were able to describe what veganism means. So this is in the urban areas and the English speaking population, who we are saying or assuming that they would know more. Yeah, and what Pareen, I think she mentioned one of the things, so it's not a direct conclusion or anything, but it's a food for thought. Basically, so there's some awareness of milk substitutes, and then there's also high awareness of companies and people who sell vegan products, so that could be or could not be a part of communication. And then Indian celebrities, so people basically, their attention goes up when some celebrity is involved. And yeah, the awareness of vegan alternatives, that's higher amongst the younger age group, 18 to 30-year-olds.
awareness of milk alternatives. So the most important thing is awareness of milk alternatives has a very strong positive correlation with correct understanding of veganism and the intention to adopt veganism. So that's an important part of it.
Yeah, so I think one of my takeaways has been, and it may need more exploration, is any deep or serious effort into veganism will go through the milk route. I mean, milk is involved, it's a big factor in one way or the other. Then what's the perception of vegan alternatives? Now we have to take these findings with a pinch of salt because people have claimed that they know and they are aware, and then the actual understanding is lower. So some of these numbers will have to be looked from that angle. So people say that yeah, vegan food is healthy and nutritious, and that it's easily available and it's tasty. There is one nuance to this. For example, when we ask people, whether vegan food is expensive. So on that question, those who had a correct understanding gave a higher number for that, yeah, vegan food is expensive, as compared to those who did not have the correct understanding or who had a lower understanding.
Excuse me, vegan food or vegan alternatives? Alternatives.
Vegan food.
But vegan food is not expensive.
I mean, this is just perception. We didn't say that it's expensive or not. We just...
Alternatives.
So, drivers of vegan adoption. So, health is the primary driver. That also came through in the literature review. And climate or environment change is a driver. Then taste, I think in the earlier Western literature review, taste is not coming up, or we have not studied. But in the Indian context, I think taste will play a role, and it came out in this study. And then prevention of violence towards animals. So in that order, basically. But I think health is the primary driver.
But again, this comes with a caveat, as in the case of the literature review. Those in the younger age groups and those who have already turned vegan. Importantly, the survey was done with people, non-vegans. If they were vegan, they were eliminated from the study. Yeah, keep that in mind. Whereas we talk to a lot of vegan activists, they'll say animal rights was the primary reason.
Right, so the health attributes of vegan food, there's high endorsement that yeah, vegan food is healthy. But then this statement needs to be taken on a standalone basis. So someone claiming that vegan or agreeing that vegan food is healthy need not imply that the non-vegan food is unhealthy, or they take that as unhealthy. Because if you look at the numbers, some of the numbers go down when we basically qualify the statement. So when we start saying to be healthy and fit, it's important to avoid meat and eggs, so then the agreement goes down. And it goes further down when we talk about milk. Milk and milk products are not good for health and fitness. So there seems to be basically a different psychology, sensitivity around milk, and when we bring different other angles to consumption. The awareness of factory farming practices is pretty low. So even such thing as in which has been in the news for a long time, like usage of antibiotics and hormones. So even there the awareness is only around 50%, only half the people are aware. And people are not aware of artificial insemination in the dairy industry. The awareness is particularly low in fishing and poultry. So we have to keep in mind that poultry, chicken is the most consumed meat, and even there the awareness of some of the not so wholesome practices is not very high.
And the awareness was highest in the younger age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So across, young age group of 18 to 30, they show a bit more awareness and knowledge about it. And again, disapproval of factory farming practices. So basically, the lack of wholesome practices which are followed, that seems to be a non-issue for many of the people. And when it comes to like breeding, raising cows in captivity, so then the disapproval basically goes up. So there the people would rather that good and healthy and wholesome practices are followed in the dairy industry in breeding and raising cows.
What I want to point out also is that the disapproval of dairy practices is much higher
Yeah.
than the disapproval for factory farming practices for meat. And perhaps it's not so surprising given the reverence for the cow in India. I hope I can be good.
The other thing is, it's really important to look at the first bullet. 25% of respondents had no opinion on the matter. They couldn't care less this way or that, which means it's not even important for them to have enough for them to have an opinion. So it's low salience issue. Yeah.
Yeah, so personal choice is important. People make their own choices, they want to make their own choices, and we have to keep in mind to respect that element. Speciesism basically is there, people, but they are all qualified. So, for example, if we make a more generic statement like basically humans and animals morally they have the same right, so then more people will agree. And then we say that animals need to be treated with due care and respect, so people will agree. But when we start talking about food, so basically we have to take care of our food habits when talking about or treating animals, so then the agreement goes down actually. So that's again that dissonance factor comes in again. Now, attitudes towards vegans, what do people think about vegans? So, there are three levels. They look up to them, they find what they are doing, what they stand for as truly worthy and commendable. But then, at the same time, it could be that that's what's being done is commendable and worthy, but there are different people. I mean, it's good, I value what they do, but it's not for me. That could be one angle to it. And then going further, like they also judge them as being moralistic and judgmental themselves, some of them.
Can I ask a question on this?
Yeah.
So were these the exact statements that were asked to people?
Yes.
Okay. What?
And they were reverse
Right. Like 3 and 4 are pretty leading statements, right?
Yeah, so I mean that's part of the design when we are doing the statistical analysis. So I think different ways we try to approach the same thing and try to see if there is any contradiction or not.
Needs to do that.
Sorry, go back, Bharti. I think it's really important here we had these statements for a reason. Almost half of the respondents who agreed with the statement, my family and friends will be upset or make fun of me if I become vegan, testing for vegan stigma, half of them were least likely to adopt veganism, whereas the figure for those who are more likely to adopt veganism was 39, much lower. So those who are more likely to adopt veganism have a greater sense of support from friends and family than do the others. So that's the big takeaway. Yeah.
Intention to adopt veganism, so broadly we can say that maybe 40 to 50% people are open to the idea of changing their diet, their lifestyle around a more vegan setup. This figure goes up amongst those obviously who have a better awareness, and then I think later we'll study that the exposure to communication. So only, the exposure to any sort of communication or messaging on veganism is pretty low. Could be a factor of basically because the messages themselves are not that many, and it's not yet mainstream. So amongst those who've been exposed to the messaging, the intention to adopt is higher as compared to the normal population. So I mean, that's basically a route for us to say that yeah, we need more messaging and communication strategies.
Yeah, but I think it's also important to mention that perhaps most of the advocacy happens on social media, and it's the younger age groups who are using more social media, and so the older age groups don't fall within that ambit.
Well, finally, so we had done some statistical analysis and we found that for these factors, there were more positive, higher correlations, and these attributes can lead to higher adoption or intention to adopt. So one is awareness of milk substitutes. So if that is high, that may lead to or should lead to greater adoption of veganism. Awareness of artificial insemination of cows, buffaloes. And attitudes towards a vegan diet is healthy. It can solve health problems, maybe with some examples and more illustrations. Attitudes towards animal rights, that has a positive correlation with the intention to adopt. Social norms, so like Rukma said, this is a very big factor. What will people, my family and friends think of me? So that's actually a key issue. So they may not like me or they may make fun of me. So that is a factor. So we have to look into how to address that. And incidentally, those who have a greater likelihood of adopting veganism or vegan diet, for them it's less of a concern what the family and friends think. And then finally, availability of vegan food alternatives. So one is the awareness and then is the availability. So they are both again related. Negative correlation, so when the frequency of meat consumption is higher, so amongst those cohorts where the consumption is higher for meat, there's less chance likelihood that there will be more conversion. And then cost.
Yeah. This also corroborates the finding that I shared from the literature review about the meat attachment. Yeah, those studies done in the West. The higher the meat attachment, the lower the intention to adopt. And
Yeah, I think so.
Was there any data at all on the exposure to poorly worded vegan messaging that was a negative correlation?
What?
A negative correlation. Like someone says you're an asshole for eating meat. Is that negative? It seems to me that it should be, but was there any data at all on that?
Yeah, so not directly, we not explored that, but like in the findings when we say that, I mean the perception that they have, that they are moralistic, judgmental people, so it could maybe possibly come through such sort of messaging wherein someone is being looked down. Yeah, it's food for thought.
I say generally it's unpleasant, right?
yeah,
If you just
That's
stare at
right.
someone for being who they are.
yeah. What's the next one?
So I think we are done and
Okay, yeah.
Rukma will take us through the last part of this marathon.
Sorry. Just leave that there, I guess, if anyone wants to ask questions.
Sure. So,
We thought it was important to, there was a reason why we did 3 large reports as part of the study to check for congruence and resonance across the 3 studies. And sure enough, these are just some of them that I put together very quickly under huge deadline pressure, but I'm sure there's many more. Health as a primary driver for vegan adoption, followed by environment and animal rights. We saw that in the literature review. The CAP survey corroborated that. That social media, it's not applicable basically, yeah. And we didn't find so much content focused on health as a driver. And I also do want to say, in the literature review, there was also other meta-analyses which suggest that animal rights is a primary motivator. So it's something that one needs to take into account which groups, where, what, yeah. Common animal rights strategies in the literature review, it's great. We found that our social media analysis reflects good use of all these appeals and strategies. CAP survey didn't get into that. Also in the literature review, because it was mostly Western, the behavioral science work, there's a lot of focus on reducing red meat consumption and also humane animal derived, the free range. In the social media analysis, we didn't want to study Licious and Keggs. It's our own bias. But of course, commercial enterprises are promoting free range, especially in the wake of COVID. They're capitalizing it to promote this kind of meat and animal derived products. Wasn't relevant for our CAP survey. Younger age groups, more inclined. Yes, in the literature review, in the social media analysis, I talked about how vegan advocacy in India has a young face, and the CAP survey corroborated that. Women displaying a greater intention, yes, in the literature review and in the CAP survey. We didn't really get into that, but look around the room here and see how many XXs and XYs are present. Yeah?
It is the same trend. You see all over the world also. About 70% of vegans are women.
Yes.
Only 30% are men.
Yes. And 70% of animal rights groups in the US, the people are women. That's there in a study we included in the literature review. And vegan stigma, yeah, it's there in the literature review, and certainly the CAP survey also suggests that. So this in effect sums up the findings from the 3 studies, 3 reports, and now to look at some blue skies and have a vision for the future. Some recommendations. We really need to accelerate and deepen vegan advocacy far more. We all live in our own little bubbles. We have great intentions. We do great work, but it needs to get out. And the problem is when you're doing vegan advocacy from, for example, animal rights groups, social media handle, Facebook or Instagram, who are you reaching? You're preaching to the choir, right? So it's really something that we need to think about. And exposure to vegan advocacy is a first and necessary step. 50% of them say, yeah, we will. Of course, there's a gap also between expressed intention and actually doing it, but at least they say they will. We need to shift from content creation to content dissemination. And I know there are many well-meaning groups that create so much content and it really goes nowhere. And we need to expand from the early stages of behavior change to the latter stages so people actually know how to turn vegan. It's not expensive, DIY, simple, doable. And certainly Indianize everything, most Indian food by default is vegan. Adding ghee and this, that and the other is just an additional thing which is not necessary. We need to focus on dairy. It's going to yield early dividends, higher awareness of factory farming practice, many indicators that we went through and correlations. And the key target groups going forward, the young, 18 to 30, women and vegetarians. And I must share my discomfort around this because vegetarianism in India is conflated with religion and caste, upper caste basically, and we need to steer ourselves away from that. We know how much discourse there is in the media now about caste, and we really need to keep it secular and inclusive. And we need a strategic mix of appeals, health, but only on a standalone basis, not comparing it. And our strategy and our appeals need to be segmented for different demographics, age, gender, profile, socioeconomic group. And environment, we need to simplify complex information, doable. Also, I haven't seen anyone pushing the environment argument and saying XYZ companies or industries need to be held responsible for these kinds of violations. Sign a petition. You see a lot of that in the West. You don't see that in India. But that's the kind of thing that will have more traction than asking people to go vegan immediately. And AR focus. So they say having petitions followed by dietary pledges is the way to go if you use moral shock. Religion and spirituality, I think, is an untapped opportunity opportunity in India to promote veganism with all the necessary caveats and caution. Next. And lifting our, going from the immediate behavior chain, we need to have social norms and on-ground networks. I don't know how many cities have on-ground networks, vegan groups, potlucks. Some of us do, some cities do. We need to focus more on health and fitness advocates, not just, glamour girls. And it would do us good to have mixed and diverse ensembles of influencers and celebrities. Men, women, different age groups, people having some gravitas. We really need to invest in research, monitoring and evaluation. We need to have all of these things done, strategies, audience segments, messages, and assess impact. We don't want to keep doing something and not knowing where it's going into some deep dark hole. We need to know the impact of our advocacy and correct ourselves, mid-course. And we really need to be integrating, and these are challenges, integrate the animal rights argument within the broader social justice movement, right to food, human rights, and shifting from consumption to just sustainability. And we need to have lots more messengers out there with a different face. Animal rights, yes, but other faces too. We need to see. We need to have these intersectoral partnerships and alliances and have these round tables, and they've been used in the past for other issues in the country, forging alliances, getting everybody into a room to discuss a contentious issue and arrive at a sort of platform for discussion, dialogue and moving forward. And we need policy advocacy, partnership building, we need campaigning in BCC, we need marketing, we need to engage with government, private sector, news and entertainment, media, many others. Ethical consumerism provides another opportunity for looking at labeling and, as I said, point of purchase and interventions and nudges, choice architecture. Of course, the challenges with ethical consumerism is that consumer education literacy is so low in India, and the willingness to pay is much lower than the stated intention of, valorizing ethical products. There's a lot of ignorance and lack of transparency around certifications. Next. And finally, it's really about a keg issue. I really think one needs to look at certain groups and calibrate our messaging. I love this article from The Wire, Shailesh Rai, also Bangalore-based, who talks about wealthy. I'm not saying it should be wealthy, but it should be upper middle class, I personally think. And because what we know from our experience, since I do come from the social sector, I do know a lot of social justice activists and campaigners who will eat meat and beef because they want to express solidarity with marginalized populations, which is really skewed understanding. But this is a fantastic article. We need to calibrate our messaging for our audiences. And there are these issues about religion, caste, and all of that. And there is malnutrition, especially among marginalized populations. And the weird thing is, even to treat severely and acutely malnourished children, in India, the government program gives RUTF, which is completely vegan, right? Ready to use therapeutic food, RUTF. That's what the government gives for little babies and children who are severely malnourished. There's also this issue about in India, MOEF has put out reports saying construction is the main cause of climate change in India, which doesn't stand to reason because we have the highest cattle population anywhere in the world. We are the #1 producer of milk. So it doesn't stand to reason. So I don't know, it's hard to access data from India. And there are just 2 or 3 people doing this. Some of this from Brighter Green, they had done, but that's an old paper. So something that we need to look at. Why? Because so much is at stake. The good news about is veganism failing? It's not. There's a reason we are all here today. The compounded annual growth rate of veganism, 11.32, projected to grow, the plant-based market. And we know for a fact that we are quite a leader, thanks to Bollywood and a whole bunch of things. The neighboring countries pick up on our popular culture and ape those trends. So we are in a good place. Next. And thanks to each and every one of you for being here and making a difference. It's possible.
Thank you.